Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining this morning. And this morning, we are going to begin the third chapter of Tanya. Until this point in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe has taught us a few things. The Alter Rebbe has taught us that the human being is made of two souls. That's new. We have to mention the learning today is Le'ilei Nishmas Edel Fegi Bas Meisha Leib. The Neshama should have an aliyah, and the learning should be in the schus of her. There are two souls, the Alter Rebbe tells us. There is a soul that's from the side of Kedusha, from the side of holiness. And that soul is a veritable piece of Hashem from on high. That soul is introduced to the human being, who really is the product of a very different process. The human being in general is like the rest of the world. It's created with a body that is formed of the four elements of the earth. There is a soul that's formed of the four elements of the earth as well. And that is called the animal soul, or as we saw from Reb Chaim Vital, he calls it the elemental soul. The elemental soul is made of the four elements: Eish, Mayim, Ruach, Ofar, fire, water, wind, and earth. I'm telling you the Hebrew words because today it'll be important to remember those Hebrew words. And they're called Eish, Mayim, Ruach, Ofar. Eish is spelled Aleph Shin, Eish. Mayim is spelled Mem Yud Mem, Mayim. And Ruach, Reish Vav Ches, Ruach means wind. And Ofar is earth, Ayin Fe Reish. Four elements. Because those four elements are of this world, they, like everything in this world, is a mixture of good and evil. After Adam and Chava ate from the tree of knowledge, there is good in that soul, in the elemental soul of the human being, and there is evil in the elemental soul of the human being. And from there we learned that the elemental soul of the human being causes bad behavior, has bad tendencies. But because of the goodness in the elemental soul, it causes good behavior and good tendencies, such as mercy. All this we learned in the chapters leading up to this one. And now what we will learn, chapter 3, 4, and 5, the Alter Rebbe will take us through a very detailed tour of the actual makeup of the various souls, the pieces, the parts, the tools that Hashem has provided each soul, or the godly soul. In these three chapters, we're going to be talking about specifically the godly soul. Afterwards, in chapters 6, 7, and 8, we'll talk about the pieces and parts of the animal soul. For now, we're talking about the godly soul. What are the tools that Hashem has provided the godly soul in order to help it and to allow it to function in this physical world, to do its job? The Rebbe points out in a Sikha from 1990 that in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe addresses something that until now was a bit of an enigma, was a bit of a mystery. Until now, we've learned that the soul, the divine soul in the Jew, is a chelek elika mimal mamosh. It's a veritable piece from God on high. What's mimal? That means al means above, high up. Mimal means higher than the top. And mima'al means higher than even being considered higher than the top. God himself, the original light of Hashem, that is the source. That's the mine from which each soul is carved. The trouble is then, if the soul is a veritable piece from God on high, or chelek elika mimal, a veritable piece of God from way above, But the Alter Rebbe adds the word mamash. Mamash means literally. Mamash also means tangibly or tangible. So you could translate it this way, and we did in the first chapter. We discussed the second chapter. We discussed this. We brought one answer, and on this chapter, the Rebbe brings another answer. The Alter Rebbe says, "Chelek elika mimal mamash." The soul could be. We can understand that phrase like this: the soul is a veritable piece from on high, made tangible. Chelek elika mimal, made into mamash, made tangible. Says the Rebbe, how does a veritable piece from God on high become tangible? And the answer is the tools that Hashem provided for the godly soul, with which it will function in this world, which we will learn are a mirror image of the tools that Hashem himself uses. They provide the mamoshus, they provide the tangibility of the soul, of the divine spark from on high that is absolutely spiritual and not tangible at all. With that in mind, those two introductions, we realize that we are going to learn about the tools that Hashem has provided the godly soul so that it can function in the physical world and achieve its goals. And we are going to learn about the structure of the divine soul in the next 3 chapters. Knowing this, we will approach the 3rd chapter of Tanya and begin to learn. Says the Alter Rebbe, chapter 3. Actually, let's read the text of the Tanya in English, in Hebrew. Okay, chapter 3 begins like this. Vehine, behold, kol bechina umadrega. Each of these levels that we learned about in the previous chapter. In the previous chapter, we learned that souls have different levels. There's souls on the level of nefesh, there are souls on the level of ruach, there are souls on the level of neshama. Each of these chapters each of these kinds of souls, they are each made up kalula me'eser bechinos. They are all made of 10 faculties. Here we are. Each of these 3 distinctions and grades, nefesh, ruach, and neshama, kalula me'eser bechinos. They are made of 10 faculties. Keneged eser sfiras elyonos shenishtal shelo mehem, corresponding to the 10 sephiros from which they descend. Anechalokos l'shtayim. These 10 spheres are subdivided into 2 general categories, shehein, which are shalosh imos, v'sheva kfulos. There are 3 mothers, meaning 3 attributes, 3 divine attributes that are primary, and 7 divine attributes that emerge from them. Pirush, that means chochma, bina, v'das. The 3 primary ones are the intellectual ones, called chochma, wisdom, bina, understanding, das, knowledge, v'shiv'as yemei habinyan, and the 6 days of creation, which are a reference to the 6 which correspond to the 6 emotional attributes of chesed, gvura, tiferes, and so on. And the Rebbe here doesn't list them all, but we know what they are. Netach, Hoid, Yesod, Malchus. V'kach b'nefesh ha'adam, and the same is true, it's paralleled in the soul of a person, shenechelekes l'shtayim, that the inner workings of the human soul, the divine soul, as well as the animal soul, which we'll learn about beginning in chapter 6, also is divided. The faculties are divided into 2 groups, intellectual and emotive. ChabadCLE, the intellectual category, includes chochma, bina, v'das. Those intellectual faculties that mirror Hashem's intellectual attributes, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And the midos, the emotive ones, are, because this is a divine soul, it's ahavas Hashem ufachadoi v'yirad asu l'fayre. that because it's a divine soul, the emotions are all about Hashem, and therefore the emotions of this soul are to love Hashem, are to fear Hashem, to revere Hashem, to beautify Hashem, and so on. The Chochma Bina Das Nikru Imais, and again, the intellectual pieces are called the mothers, so to speak, because they are called the source of the emotions, because the emotions are born from the intellect. Now, this is as far as we're going to go in the chapter today. But let's break this open and see what we can learn and how we can deepen our understanding of this section. We have a statement from the Alter Rebbe that says that the 10 intellectual and emotional faculties of the divine soul are a reflection, and they are even an extension of Hashem's own divine attributes. That means Hashem has 10 attributes in his light. Of course, Hashem is not made of attributes. This we know. We learned this from Eliyahu Hanavi in the statement, Pasach Eliyahu v'Yomar Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, you have emanated attributes, but you are not of these attributes. That means Hashem created tools. He formed the tools with which he would manage his creation. And because the soul of man, because the divine soul is a veritable piece from on high, then the soul will function in the image of Hashem. It says in the Chumash Bereshis that man was created in the image of God. What is that image? So the commentaries have various explanations, but the mystics say it's a reference to the soul of the human being, that just as the divine attributes are in a set of 10, 3 intellectual and several emotional, then the soul of the human being is in the same image. It's in that mirror image with 10 faculties, 3 intellectual, and 7 emotional. Where are these 10 attributes mentioned first? And here we're going to start reading something that is going to be a little difficult to swallow, but we'll do the best that we can. Just we'll do a quick scan of the material. We're not trying to become experts in Kabbalah. We just want to have some background, some of the inside information. This comes from Sefer Yetzirah. The relevant quote is, Eser Sfiros Bli Ma. The Sefer Yetzirah in the first chapter lists the various things, 32 pathways with which Hashem prepared to manage his creation. Among them are 10 numbers, which are called 10 spheres. We call them attributes. Bli Ma. But let's not forget that these are without any created substance. The Esrim Mushtayim Oisiyos, there are also 22 letters. Yesoid, Shalosh, they are the foundations of all things. Of these letters, there are Shalosh Imais. You see, this is where the Alter Rebbe borrowed the language from. Shalosh Imais, 3 primary ones called mothers, the Sheva Kfulos, and 7 secondary ones called doubles, Ushtem Esrei Pshutais, and 12 simple ones. We could take a look in the commentaries, which we will do now, and fasten your seatbelt. This is going to be an interesting ride for those of us that are not well versed in Kabbalah. We'll just read a little bit. The 3 primary letters are actually Aleph, Mem, Shin, and Aleph, Mem, Shin represent the 3 out of the 4 elements. Avir, Mayim, Eish, Aleph, Mem, Shin, and there is a 4th element. So you'll ask, what happened to the 4th element? Well, in the first chapter where we were learning the Shara Kedusha from Chaim Vital, we mentioned that many Mekubalim and many experts in Torah experts, they say that the 4th element is actually just the product of the upper 3. And so there really are 3 primary elements that produce a 4th primary element. And that means that of the letters of the Aleph base with which Hashem created the world, 3 are primary and everything else emerges from or results from them. We have the letter Aleph, the letter Mem, and the letter Shin, and everything comes from them. Sheva Kfulos. Then there are 7 doubled letters. Why are these letters called Kfulos? Why are they called doubled? Well, these letters, if you look into the Aleph base, will find that there are letters that can be read softly or strongly. Does anybody remember? Can you put into the comments if you have your chat box available? If you can put into the comments which letters of the Aleph base. Put in examples of letters of the Aleph base that can be read either softly or strongly. The first example is a Beis. Good. Very good. Okay, so Shin and Sin are not considered, for whatever reason, they're not considered soft and strong. They're considered one letter, the same letter, and the Sin can be switched out for a Samach. So I'm not exactly sure what the rules are about the Shin and the Sin, but it's true. We have many good examples. Very, very good. So we have, good. We have Beis and Veis, that's good. Fei and Pei, very good. Ooh, Kaf and Chaf, very good. And Dalid, very good. Dalid is a surprise one because in Ashkenazi language, the Dalid is hard to emphasize. There are even in modern Hebrew. In modern Hebrew, you don't emphasize a Dalid or de-emphasize a Dalid. There are some Jewish Hebrew Torah dialects that do emphasize the Dalid, and a strong Dalid is like the letter D, and a soft Dalid is like a soft TH, as in the word the. Different than a strong TH, which sounds like more like the word thin, which would be the opposite of a tough. The letter tough and thuf would be like an S with a lisp. Tough and thuf. Dalid and Dalid. It's a vocalized Dalid. Then, good. Gimel and Jimel. Aleph and Ayin are actually 2 different letters, completely. Very good. So I think we have all but one of them. And the last one that's listed here in the sources, I actually don't know. I actually don't know what the emphasized sound is and what the de-emphasized sound is. It's the letter Resh. I don't know how to emphasize it or de-emphasize it. We'll have to check with our multicultural community and find out how you emphasize or de-emphasize the letter Resh. The bottom line is that the 7 doubled letters, that means that they can be expressed strongly or softly, they are Beis, Gimel, Dalid, Kaf, Pei, Resh, and Saf. They are 7. It's appropriate that the emotions of the soul are called doubled, and that the doubling is the result of the fact that they can be strong or soft, because in the human experience also, an emotion is sometimes very strong, very intense, and sometimes it's not so intense. Sometimes it's soft, not so hard, not so powerful, not so overwhelming. And so, whereas the Aleph, Mem, Shin, the 3 intellectual faculties, Chochma, Bina, Das, they are not sometimes strong and sometimes soft. They are what they are. Let's go back to the sources now. And we will remember, thank you for participating in the comment section, and we will remember that the Rebbe wrote in Chapter Gimel. Chapter Gimel writes that the 10 faculties in the human being correspond to and unfold from the 10 divine attributes, which means not only are they our emotions in the divine soul, not only are they separate creations that mirror and correspond to the 10 divine attributes, they are the 10 divine attributes made small, compacted, contracted, and expressed into the human soul. And the Alter Rebbe expressed this. We learned a letter towards the end of last year, an amazing letter where Avraham Avinu was saying, I am like ash and dirt before you. The Alter Rebbe says, why is he calling himself names? Why is he speaking badly about himself? He's not. Avraham Avinu was describing the difference between the emotive attributes in his soul, in his life, compared to the divine attribute that he corresponded to. He said, and the analogy is ash. Once upon a time, you have a big, beautiful tree, and it stands so tall and it's so impressive, right? The California red oak, if that's the one that I'm thinking of, like where you can drive a car between the roots. Yeah. And then there's a wildfire, and no more California red oak. If you know the name of that tree that I'm thinking about, can you put it in the comments, please? Where you literally people drive their cars beneath the roots. Very impressive, huge, awe-inspiring tree. And then the fire comes, burns it down, and what's left? Ashes. Did somebody come and create something new? Where did these ashes come from? It's a redwood. Thank you. Sequoia also, Mistama. Thank you. What is it? What is this? What is this ash? Where did it come from? Yeah, the fire comes and creates something new, provides new physical material? Of course not. The fire came and released the element of fire from the redwood or the sequoia, and released the element of water, and released the element of air, leaving only the element of earth. It's the same tree, but it has been degraded. It has been downgraded so that it's left only a pile of ash. It's the same material, but you cannot compare a pile of ash to a California redwood. Same thing says Avraham Avinu, I am the embodiment of the divine attribute of kindness. Not a separate thing. He is divine kindness, Avraham Avinu, so much so that Hashem's own divine attribute of kindness said to Hashem, as long as Avraham Avinu is on the earth, I am out of a job. I'm not necessary. I'm redundant. Because Avraham Avinu does my job. Of course, to compare the emotional attributes in the divine soul to the original divine attributes is preposterous. Like Avraham Avinu said, you cannot compare them. But it is the same material. Our divine soul has kindness that is the same as Hashem's divine attribute of kindness. And the same is true about all of the attributes. Let's read what the Alter Rebbe writes about this in the letters, in letter 25, Igeres HaKodesh 25. Here's a short snippet from a letter on the subject. V'hine, we learned, Nefesh ha'adam, about the soul of man, Yadua lakoil, everybody knows, Shehi klula miyud sfiras, that it is made up of 10 attributes, Chabad v'chulu, the 3 intellectual, and the Alter Rebbe doesn't list the rest of them. We know what they are, the 7 emotional pieces. Even though they all come from the spirit of life that came from Hashem's mouth, as it says, the essence of the soul was breathed into the body of man, mikol mokim, nevertheless, derech prat, more specifically, what we're saying is that generally the soul emerges from the essential, from the mind of Hashem, like we described in the previous chapter. The essence of the soul is rooted in the essence of the Creator, the essence of the original divine light. But that's not a contradiction to the fact that the 10 faculties are the product of and extensions of the 10 divine attributes. Because that, when we say that the essence of the soul comes from chokhmah, from supernal wisdom, we're talking about the essence of the soul. But the various faculties of the soul are the mirror image and the result of the 10 divine attributes in which Hashem clothes his infinite light. Chokhmah being only one of them. And then you have the rest, Bina, Das, Chesed, Tiferet, Netzach, Yesod, and so on. So that's what he says here. That's only derech prat. That's only in a general way, but in a specific way, there is Chabad shebenafshehem dugma lechabad shebeyitzfiras. The intellect, the Chabad of your soul, is similar and corresponding to the Chabad of the 10 divine attributes, Hashem's own divine attributes, hamechunos, which are nicknamed b'shem Ava, when they are reorganized into a proper visage that makes up a full image, a full structure of energies and lights from Hashem. It's called Ava, the combination of Abba and Ima, mother and father. The intellectual pieces are called mother and father. Then the soul has midos, emotions like love and fear. They are dugma lemidos shabiyotzres hanikrais b'shem za. Love and fear of the soul, they come from the divine emotive attributes, which are, when they are structured into their emotional visage, they are called za. Also, they are those midas of Hashem produce and deliver a specific kind of energy and light into the creation, and that's called za zeir anpin, which means the small face, the small visage, because it's lacking the 10 pieces. It's lacking all the 10. It doesn't have all the 10. It has 7 out of the 10. And the koyach hadibur shebenafshay, where the power of speech in the soul of a human being is dugma lidibur ha'elyon, is similar to the divine speech, which we refer to as malchus, or we also call it shechina. And therefore, when a person is speaking words of Torah, Hashem speaks along with him. That means he's able to inspire divine speech. And he's able to bring about a union between the world and the Shekhinah, or himself and the Shekhinah. And that's why we learn that when it comes to davening, or when it comes to Kriyas Shema, or when it comes to benching, or when it comes to Torah study, a person has not fulfilled his obligation to study just by thinking alone. He has to speak, because the purpose of the learning is to unite the lights of Hashem that are inside the creation with the lights of Hashem that are beyond the creation, and to create a bridge between what is above and what is below. Thank you for pointing out the typo. We will fix it, Mirz Hashem. Next thing we learned is, we'll see the Alter Rebbe gave us some examples in chapter 3 of Tanya. The Alter Rebbe gave us some examples of the emotions and how they are expressed in the soul of a human being, in the divine soul. Let's take a look here for a second, and we are going to wonder, what are the rest of them? Here we are. Kach b'nefesh adam, so too in the soul of man. Shenechalekes l'shtayim, it's broken into 2 parts, seichel, intellectual pieces, umidos, and the emotional pieces. And of course, going on further in the chapter, the Alter Rebbe is going to take us through each one and describe it in detail, and how exactly each divine attribute provides us an opportunity to serve Hashem and to become connected to Hashem. But here, the Alter Rebbe just gives us a few subtle examples. What is the seichel? Seichel, the intellectual piece, is chachma bin avodas, and the emotional pieces are ahavas Hashem, love of Hashem. Ahavas Hashem is love of Hashem. Pachad Hashem means dread of Hashem. Yir asay, fear of Hashem, and lifa'aroi, and to beautify Hashem. We have 4 examples. 4 examples. Now you tell me, these 4 examples, which of the 10 attributes do these 4 emotional examples correspond to? Punch it in the chat box. There's Ahavas Hashem, right? The emotional attributes are Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. We have 4 examples that the Alter Rebbe gave us of the divine soul emoting. The divine soul is emoting as loving Hashem, is experiencing dread of Hashem, is experiencing fear of Hashem, and is experiencing the beauty, the glorification, and an appreciation of Hashem. Which of the 7 emotive attributes, divine attributes, or even in the soul's attributes, do these 4 descriptions correspond to? So we have one suggestion: Chesed, Gvura, Netzach, and Hod. Good, because Hod sounds like beauty. Yeah. Chesed I see, Gvura I see, Netzach and Hod we'll have to think about. Anybody else? Turns out,
I don't understand the question.
Well, there are 4. The Torah, the Kabbalah describes the Kabbalah names the 7 emotional attributes, and right. So, but then the Alter Rebbe here says these are the corresponding emotional experiences, right? Kindness is not an emotion. Kindness is a tool, right? So what's the emotion that corresponds to kindness? Love. So we have love, Avas Hashem. What is the emotion that corresponds to Gvura?
Fear? I don't know.
Right. Usually it's understood to be fear. But fear as in Pachad or fear as in Yira? And the reason I'm going through this in such length is because I want to point out, what the Rebbe points out, what the commentaries point out, a tremendous difference between Pachad and Yira. Let's look inside the Alter Rebbe's letter, another letter from the Igeres HaKodesh, the Holy Letters. This is from the 15th letter. This is very, very chopped up because the Alter Rebbe is writing at greater length than what we have time for today. Of course, we always have time for the Alter Rebbe's writing, but as relates to chapter 3, this is what we need basically. The Alter Rebbe is going to go through each of these levels, each of these emotions, and describe to us how they function in terms of the soul's experience. Here we go. Vihine, Klolus Hayud Sviris Shebenishmas Ha'adam. With regards to the general idea of the 10 Sviris in the soul of man, Noida Lakoil, everyone knows, Sha'amidos Nechelokes B'derech Klal L'Shiva Midos, that the Midos, the emotional traits, are divided into 7. The Chol Pirati Hamidos Sheba'adam, all particular feelings and experiences inside of a human being, they all come from one of those 7 midos, Shehem Sheirosh Kol HaMidos Uchlal Lusan, because they are the general categories and they are the source of all of the other attributes. What are they? And the Alter Rebbe goes in detail. Shehein, they are Midas HaChesed, the emotion, the attribute of Chesed, whose inclination is to give without limit. To give without limit. Umidas HaGvura, then you have the attribute of severity, whose inclination is litzamtzem milhashpia kolkach, to restrict the amount of giving, oy shelo lahashpia klal, or to absolutely not give at all. Then you have midas harachamim, you have the attribute of rachamim, mercy or compassion, rachim al mishashayich loshen rachamonos alav, to have compassion on a person or on a being who is in need of compassion. And in the Spheres, that one is called Tiferes. Why is it called Tiferes? Why is it called beauty? Because it's a combination of Chesed and Gvura, and anything that's a combination of 2 different colors, that's already beautiful. When you have just a single color, if it's just chesed or just gvura, that's not so beautiful. It's a little monotonous. But once you have a combination where you have the givingness of chesed together with the the calculations of gvura, that's a beautiful thing. And all of this my father described at length in the introduction video. I'll put a link to it when we publish this on YouTube, I'll put a link to it in the description. The achakach, then afterwards, once you have decided whether you're going to act out of chesed, or you're going to act out of gvura, or you're going to act out of tiferes or rachamanos, then it's time to actually give. When it's time to actually give, you have to start calculating. How are you going to give? How do you prepare your gift, your diffusion, in a manner that the recipient can actually receive it? The example that the Alter Rebbe gives is of a teacher and a student, or a father and a child, who's trying to teach wisdom to his child. If the father will speak in highfalutin language, as much as he wishes his child to learn, the child's not going to receive anything from him. He has to judge carefully. He has to measure his words. Yeah, as my father said on a different lecture. Yeah, speak as an adult, but sound like a father, something like that. You have to plan very carefully how to give over the messages to your children, to your students. So this calculation, this judgment process, the measuring process, making sure that the gift that you are giving is of the right type and of the right size for the recipient to actually be able to handle it and receive it from you, it should be a benefit for them, that is called netzach v'hoid. The Alter Rebbe will give us a specific description in a second. Shehin kiliyos yoyatzes, they are called the kidneys that advise. Vegam, they're also called netzach v'hoid nikra shchokim v'rechayim. They're also called the pounders and the grindstones. That means it's like when a person is grinding wheat in a millstone, that it makes the grindstone makes the wheat into an edible form. It breaks it down so that the recipient can get it and it should be a benefit for the person eating. So too, when a person is preparing to give something, whatever it is, kindness, severity, compassion, if you're going to act in any way towards another person, it has to be measured and it has to be in a manner that the other person can appreciate what you're doing. And that is the process of netzach and hoid. You also have generally netzach means perseverance. To prevail and to insist that your gift arrive at its destination and to stand firmly against anything that is trying to withhold your gift from reaching the intended recipient. Whether that prevention, whether that obstacle is something inside of you or something outside of you, it doesn't matter. Netzach insists. Netzach is your ability to persevere and make sure that what you're trying to do actually gets done. And then there's the level called Yesod. Ubechinas Yesod hi al derech mashal hahiskashrus shemekasher ha'av sichlei b'seichel b'noi b'shas limudei. Yesod is basically connection. In the analogy, the father has to connect his mind very carefully, very strongly to the mind of his child while he's teaching him, while he's learning with him, and it has to be fueled by love and a desire that the child should understand. Because without that, even if the child is listening to the father and he's listening to every word, he's not going to be able to understand. If the father is detached from the child and just talking for himself, the child's going to have a hard time understanding. The first step in preparing a student to receive is the ability to connect to the student and make sure that there's a tremendous interest and yearning and desire and love for the student, that the yearning and desire that the student should know, should be really, really understand. That's the yearning and the desire that has to fill the hearts and minds of teachers and parents when they're trying to impart wisdom to their students and their children. And then we're back to our original point, the most important point. The root and source of all of these emotions are hapnimius v'chitzonis, whether these emotions are the internal ones or the external ones, whether they are private or expressed. Hu mechabad shebenafsha. They are all rooted in the intellect of your soul. Ki lefi seichel ha'adam kach hein midosov. Because according to the intellect of a person, that is how the emotions are going to be. Hein b'chinas katnos. Let's say if the intellect of a person is immature, kach kol midosov, so too will his emotions be immature. Hein b'dvarim katne ha'erech. His interests will be towards things of little value. The Gamba Gedolim, it's true also by adults, lefi sichla yehul al ish, that when a person grows, the greater his mind is, the more significant his interests will be. Ki lefi reiv chachmasei kach hu reiv ahavasei, according to his maturity, according to the strength and the broadness of his mind, his emotions should correspond properly and be very broad and very rich. And that's true across the board. Now, here, the Alter Rebbe, by pointing out at the beginning of Tanya, in chapter 3, that the mind, the intellectual faculties, are the root and or can be called the root and cause of your emotions, requires a bit of explanation on two fronts. First of all, we just said that the emotions in the divine soul are rooted not in the mind of the soul itself, but in the 10 divine attributes that belong to Hashem. So how are we calling the emotional pieces of the soul the product of the intellectual part of the soul? They are nishtalshelu, they are the same material, they unfold, they are the product of Hashem's divine attributes, not the soul's chachma. So we have to solve that issue before we go home today. And secondly, what is the moral message? Every word in Tanya is also a moral message for us. None of this should be taken just as information. There was a time when we thought that way. There was a time, but we have matured. And now we realize that every statement that the Alter Rebbe is making has moral significance, has a significance in training us to serve Hashem in the best way, according to the Alter Rebbe's approach, according to the Chabad approach. How does this help us to understand and see the best way to serve Hashem? So let's back up one step. The description of the emotional attributes, the description of the soul's 10 faculties being the product of the 10 divine attributes means what? We said it before. The 10 divine attributes of Hashem. First of all, punch it into the chat box. The 10 divine attributes of Hashem are referring to which attributes? On the map of creation that we learned. We've learned about so much, the map of creation. On the map of creation, which exactly are the ones that we call Hashem's attributes? On which level are these attributes? Where do those attributes find themselves?
What level? What do you mean? What world?
What world?
Tzilos? He's in all of them. Hashem's in all of them.
Hashem is in all of them, but we don't refer to all of the attributes that are across the whole board as Hashem's divine attributes. And Randy raised a very important issue, a very important point. And that is, the way it works is as follows. Hashem's light is pure. Hashem's light it's called simple. I know some people are very uncomfortable with this description of Hashem's light being simple, but simple means without any definition, without any category, like we learned last week. The debate between the various Mikubalim and the various Jewish philosophers, the debate about the question of the purity and the simplicity of Hashem's original light and of his spheres. Hashem's original light is pure and beautiful and simple. You can't even call it beautiful, really. It's beyond any description, fine. But then Hashem created 10 powers, 10 tools with which he will run the world. And into those tools, Hashem emanated 10 lights corresponding to them. And that's called spheres of the realm of Atzilus. Those spheres then radiate light into the next level of creation called Bria, and from there it goes into Yitzira, and from there it goes into Asiya, so that every level of creation and every individual creation has in them 10 spheres, 10 divine attributes in one combination or another. Each individual level and each individual creation reflecting the sphere that is its primary influence, that is its primary source. But only one collection, only one set of 10 attributes are called the divine attributes of Hashem, Hashem's attributes. Only one level is called Hashem's wisdom, Hashem's kindness, Hashem's judgment, and that is the midos on the level of Atzilus, which is the highest level. What does Atzilus mean? Atzilus means Eitzel, next to, or Ne'etzal, emanated. Emanated means you have a piece of rock, you have a piece of stone, and you take a piece of the stone away from the big piece, a small piece away from the big piece. It's the exact same material. That is called carved, and what we're describing here is emanated, because the difference between carving and emanating is that when you carve out something from another, you are left with a small piece of the original material, but the original block is missing something now. Emanation means the original block wouldn't be missing anything even once you carved out your little piece. A good example of it is a flame. You can light many, many flames. Fire can emanate more fire without losing anything of itself. So Hashem emanates light into the 10 spheres of Atzilus, and those are called Hashem's divine attributes. They unfold through all the layers of existence until they are made small enough to be implanted and imprinted on the soul of man, the divine soul of a human being. That's the root. That means they are there. The soul has chesed in it. That means the soul has love and the ability to be generous, always, even when a person is angry and stingy. Every soul has chesed as part of its makeup. And when a person is being loving and generous, the soul still has the midah of gvura, of restrictiveness, of discipline, of anger, of hatred, of fear. It's still there, even if it's not expressed. They're always there. Why then would the Alter Rebbe say that the emotional pieces are the product of the soul's own intellectual pieces? Let's take a very, very close look at the Alter Rebbe's words, and the answer will become patently clear. Chochma bina das nikreu imes lemkoir lamidos. Chabad, the intellectual faculties, are called the mothers. They are called the mothers. Very rarely does the Alter Rebbe say they are called something. Either they are or they aren't. What does he mean they are called? The answer is they aren't. They are not the source of the emotional faculties. The emotional faculties are there. They are a reflection. They are the product of the 10 divine attributes from Hashem. However, in order to bring any of these emotional attributes, emotional aspects, emotional powers of the human soul into a revealed state in the heart and mind of the soul, in the heart and mind of the person, the host of the soul, that depends on intellect. That depends on seichel. That depends on your understanding, as the Alter Rebbe described in the holy letters, that the more you understand, the more mature your emotions are. The more mature your mind is, the more mature your emotions are. And we are going to learn soon the difference between the intellect of the divine soul and the intellect of the animal soul is that the intellect of the divine soul is actually mature, full, has a big picture. And the intellect of the animal soul is always petty, is always small-minded, which makes the animal soul behave the way it does. Now that we understand this, we can answer the other question that we asked. What is the moral lesson? What's the moral value of this teaching that we have here at the beginning of chapter 3? The beginning of chapter 3, the Alter Rebbe is telling us that the soul has emotional attributes that are the product of the divine 10 attributes, and they function in the same way, that there are two classes of them. There are two categories. There's the intellectual faculties and the emotional faculties, and that the emotional faculties are always under the influence of, or they are the product of, the intellectual faculties. Having said that, we realize something very important. The main thrust of the Alter Rebbe's approach to serving God is that it's something that every human being can do. Remember, in the introduction to Tanya, the Alter Rebbe said, I'm writing this book to explain the verse that says, I'll pause for a second. If you remember which verse we're saying, what the issue in the verse was, what was the issue that the Alter Rebbe came to address in that verse? You can speak it on the microphone or punch it in the text box. What is the question the Alter Rebbe is coming to answer about the verse, Ki karev elecha hadavar me'od b'ficha levavcha la'asoseh?
We know Hashem is close to us.
What's the question?
How do we know it?
Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people to do this, to fulfill the entire Torah, to serve God with your heart, with your mouth, with your mind, with your hands. Always to be a servant of Hashem is something very easy for you. So the Alter Rebbe says, Moshe Rabbeinu says it's very near to you. It doesn't feel very near to you. Moshe Rabbeinu said, oh, Jewish people, what does Hashem want from you at the end of the day? Just to fear him. Alter Rebbe says, what is this? Fear is a small thing? Fear is huge. It's very hard to have Yiras Shamayim. And we'll learn later. Rabbi Yochanan, a great sage of the Talmudic times, told his great students, you had to be of a very high caliber to be a student of Rabbi Yochanan. And his deathbed, he blessed them that they should fear God to the same degree that they fear people. They said, come on, Rabbi, that's it. He said, absolutely. It's very hard to fear God the way we would fear people. When people are looking, we're bashful. We're on our best behavior. When only God is watching, we're not. Fine. It's not simple to serve God with your heart, with all your heart. But Moshe Rabbeinu says, right, as Mrs. Polster is saying, Moshe Rabbeinu is telling us it's the easiest and most natural thing for you to do, to serve Hashem with love and fear. Alter Rebbe says, how? How so? It does not appear that way. Here in chapter 3, by describing to us this fact that the emotions really are the product of the intellect, the Alter Rebbe has already provided us with the key to the whole Chabad method of serving Hashem. True, your heart is not always in your control. What you're feeling, sometimes you'll feel afraid, and your brain is telling you there's really no need to be afraid. Okay? Sometimes you'll feel an interest in something, and your brain is telling you really don't want to be interested in that. Your heart is not always in your control. Your mind is always in your control. And the Alter Rebbe's main point is, because your heart can so easily be influenced by your mind, that's the nature of the human being, the way that Hashem created us. And your mind is always in your control. You can always decide what you're going to think about. That's why, that's already a first step towards the conclusion that the Alter Rebbe is leading us to, that serving Hashem really is a very practical, tangible, and within reach kind of thing for all of us. Okay? Thank you very much for joining. That is the first part of the third chapter of Tanya.